This is A4.2 Conservation of Biodiversity for the new IB Bio curriculum. Our two essential questions are: what factors are causing the sixth mass extinction of species, and how can conservationists minimize the loss of biodiversity? Let's get started. First, what is biodiversity? It's just an abbreviation for biological diversity, squished together, biodiversity. It includes three things. Number one, ecosystem diversity, the variety of the combination of species living together in communities. But also species diversity, the many species on the evolutionary tree of life. And lastly, the genetic diversity within species. There's going to be variation in the gene pool of each species. Now, we have two ways that we can measure biodiversity, and you need to be familiar with both of these terms. First up is richness. Richness refers to the number of species present. Our other factor is evenness, where we have a similar abundance of each species present. So if you're given two ecosystems, say we have sample A here and sample B, you might be asked which of these two has a higher biodiversity. Well, you might say to yourself, okay, well, according to the richness, there's higher biodiversity in sample A because there's 3 species present, 1, 2, and 3. Whereas in sample B, there's only 2 species present. This is like moth and these little ants. On the other hand, if we were to look at evenness, we're going to see that sample B has a higher biodiversity because there are 4 of each species present, whereas sample A has 1, 1, and 6. And so we are going to learn today a calculation called the Simpson's reciprocal index that is going to allow us to take into account both richness and evenness and come up with a mathematical value for biodiversity. First up, let's look at some comparisons between the current number of species on Earth and past levels of biodiversity. Now, we can look back in the past by digging down into our geologic record. The further down we go, the older the records are, and we can look for fossils in order to see what life was like on Earth over the past hundreds of millions of years. Now we know that millions of species have been discovered, named, and described, but there are still many more species still to be discovered. But the evidence from all of these fossils show that there are currently more species alive on Earth today than at any time in the past. Over the history of our planet, there have been 5 mass extinctions. The one that you're most familiar with, I would guess, is the one that happened 65 or 66 million years ago, where a huge asteroid collided with the Earth. It caused many species to die out, including all non-avian dinosaurs. But prior to that, there are 4 other mass extinctions, and these ones are attributed to volcanic activity and major changes to the climate, to the atmosphere and climate. Now, between mass extinctions, biodiversity tends to rise as new species evolve over time. But because there have been no mass extinction events for 66 million years, biodiversity has been able to increase dramatically. However, human activity is causing what is predicted to be the 6th mass extinction. So this peak of biodiversity that we are currently at is unlikely to be sustained. So, what is driving this 6th mass extinction? This is the anthropogenic species extinction. Anthropo refers to human and genic means origin. So due to human activities, we are losing species. They are going extinct. Here are some reasons. Number 1, overharvesting. Humans take plants and animals from natural ecosystems by hunting animals and harvesting plants. That's normal and natural. But if species are taken at a faster rate than they can reproduce, then extinction will occur. Number 2, habitat destruction. Natural habitats such as forest or grasslands have been destroyed by humans for agriculture, towns, and cities. Number 3, invasive species. When alien species are introduced to ecosystems either on purpose or by accident, they can drive native species to extinction by predation, spreading of pests or diseases, or competition for resources. Number 4, pollution. Examples include plastic waste washing up on beaches and the burning of fossil fuels. okay, which then also is driving our global climate change. If environmental conditions change slowly, plants and animals can adapt to new conditions. However, human activities are causing very rapid changes in temperature, rainfall, and snow cover, and some species will be unable to adapt and will face extinction. Here we have three specific examples of species that have gone extinct for human-caused anthropogenic reasons. You should use internet resources to look up each of these organisms and find out what is its story and what is it that humans wanted from those organisms and why did they go extinct because of human activities. Next, causes of ecosystem loss. Ecosystem loss due to human impacts can be caused directly or indirectly. Land use change for agricultural expansion can occur. For example, the prairies of North America were mostly plowed up to be used as farmland in the 19th century. Urbanization, clearing of natural ecosystems to allow for building of homes, roads, factories. Overexploitation of natural resources. For example, the overfishing of cod on the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. This led to an entire fishery collapse because this cod fishery was seen as this unlimited resource, and we just took until the whole cod population collapsed. Mining and smelting, loss of natural forests in addition to pollution generated by those activities. Building of dams and extraction of water for irrigation. For example, the Nile no longer has annual floods that fertilize the land due to dam construction. Drainage or diversion of water for human use, causing the loss of swamps and other wetlands. Leaching of fertilizers into rivers and lakes causes eutrophication and algal blooms. For example, Lake Erie has had excessive growth of algae every summer since the 1990s. We'll talk more about eutrophication and how it leads to decreased dissolved oxygen in bodies of water, which then leads to death of organisms like fish. And lastly, again, climate change. Ecosystems are adapted to specific patterns of temperature and rainfall, and when these variables change, the entire ecosystem can be lost. Now I have two examples of ecosystem loss that you should look up. Mixed dipterocarp forest in Southeast Asia, and then here's an example of Celilo Falls in Oregon, where we not only experienced ecosystem loss, but there is also an really interesting human cultural mixed dipterocarp forest in Southeast Asia and Celilo Falls in Oregon. Evidence for a biodiversity crisis can be drawn from reports published by the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, or IPBES. It's an intergovernmental body. Inter means between, meaning there are many governments involved working together to put together these reports which assess the state of biodiversity. Evidence can also be gathered directly by monitoring. Many types of variables can be monitored. Population size of a species, the range of a species, the diversity of species in an ecosystem, richness and evenness of biodiversity in an ecosystem, the area occupied by an ecosystem, the extent of degradation of an ecosystem, the number of threatened species within a taxonomic group, which is a classification group, and the genetic diversity within the species itself. Surveys need to be repeated to provide evidence of change in species richness and evenness. There are opportunities for contributions from both expert scientists and citizen scientists, and both of these pictures are examples of expert scientists leading citizen scientists in collecting and monitoring data in order to track biodiversity over time and track ecosystem loss. Quick nature of science moment. To be verifiable, evidence usually has to come from a published source that has been peer-reviewed and allows methodology to be checked. Data recorded by citizens rather than scientists brings not only benefits, right? There's only so many scientists, but a lot of citizen scientists out there who are willing to help, but it also brings unique methodological concerns. If those citizens are not trained scientists, then they may not understand some scientific principles like controlling everything else in investigation besides the one thing you're changing, or the importance of random sampling. So, coming back to the question I asked at the beginning, how can we put that numerical value on biodiversity? We are going to use the Simpson's reciprocal index. It takes into account both that richness, the number of species, and the evenness, the same approximate number of individuals of each species, and it can be used to calculate biodiversity. The greater the biodiversity, the higher the value of D. So to calculate the Simpson's reciprocal index, we simply take the total number of organisms of all species present, multiply it by that total minus 1, over sigma, which means the sum of the number of organisms of a single species times that number minus 1. And so for each of these species, you would add together this little n times little n minus 1. Let me show you what I mean. Let's go back to our initial example. First thing we would do is we would collect data by counting the number of species. In this case, it doesn't matter what you assign A, B, or C to. It's just a matter of how many there are of each species that we care about. So I'm going to start by collecting my data. I've randomly assigned A, B, and C to some of these organisms in sample A. Then I'm going to use my Simpson's reciprocal index calculation. I'm going to take my total number, which is 8. I'm going to multiply by 8 minus 1, which is 7. Then I'm going to take my little n times little n minus 1. So this is my little n, the number of organisms of a single species. So I'm going to take 6 times 6 minus 1, plus 1 times 1 minus 1, plus 1 times 1 minus 1. And when I do the math and round, I'm going to get 1.9 as the value for my Simpson's reciprocal index. Now remember, the higher the number, the higher the biodiversity. So let's compare this now to the same calculation for my other sample. Okay, if I take those same counts, I do the same math, I'm going to get a value of 2.3. So you should be able to determine that sample B, according to the Simpson's reciprocal index, has a higher biodiversity. Causes of the current biodiversity crisis. Well, the overarching cause of the current biodiversity crisis is human population growth. Between 1920 and 2020, the human population more than quadrupled, from less than 2 billion to more than 8 billion. Overpopulation makes human activities a threat to most other species and risks widespread ecosystem collapse. Additional causes of this biodiversity crisis include hunting and other forms of overexploitation, urbanization, deforestation and clearance of land for agriculture, with consequent loss of natural habitat, pollution, spread of pests, diseases, invasive alien species due to global transport. So if we're looking at conserving biodiversity, we're going to see that there are going to be a variety of approaches, and no single approach by itself is going to be sufficient. Different species require different measures. So let's look at several approaches to conservation. First up, in situ conservation. This word is pronounced like the beginning of the word situation, because this means we are preserving that species in its natural habitat, or it's in its natural situation. For example, a national park or a nature reserve. Here are some buffalo at Yellowstone National Park. These are being conserved in situ. This is their natural habitat, and there's some benefits. This species lives in that abiotic environment to which it is adapted, so it has the right amount of water, the right temperature. Okay, it allows the species to interact with other wild species, so it's in its normal place in the food web. Animal behavior patterns can remain normal, and costs can be low if a wildlife reserve is in a good enough state for human intervention to be unnecessary. So this is really ideal, but sometimes it's not possible. Okay, and we'll talk about some alternatives, but we also can do active management of nature reserves. This can mean going out and doing removal of alien species, reintroduction of species that have become locally extinct, measures to increase or decrease population sizes of herbivores and predators, prevention of poaching. Sometimes we might need to do supplementary feeding of animals, and we might need to have control of access by humans. Another approach is rewilding and reclamation of degraded ecosystems. Rewilding is where very degraded ecosystems are returned to as natural a state as possible. We want them to be wild again in order for balance to be maintained by natural processes rather than human intervention. Now, we might need to start with some human intervention, but the idea is to put that space back into its wild state. All right, now I mentioned earlier, in situ conservation may not be possible. And when it's not, we may need to rely on ex situ conservation. So this is outside of the animal's natural situation or habitat. Okay, so conservation outside a species' natural habitat, it could be in zoos, botanic gardens for plants. Botanic gardens must then propagate plants, zoos must breed animals. Zoos carry out captive breeding programs that are followed then by the release of captive bred individuals back into their natural habitats if their natural habitats are not degraded so far that they can no longer live there. In some cases, removal of endangered species is justifiable because they cannot safely remain in their natural habitats. There could be problems with pollution, there could be concerns with poaching. For a variety of reasons, it may be necessary to remove endangered species from their natural habitat in order to protect them. Okay, another approach is the storage of germplasm in seed or tissue banks. This is long-term storage of living material that could be used for propagation in the future. For plants, seeds are stored at low temperatures in order to maintain viability. So if something was to happen to the plant's natural habitat, all those plants were to die, then they would be able to be replanted using the seeds that are stored in these massive seed banks. And for animals, the stored material may be samples of tissue, eggs, or sperm. Okay, one note is this massive seed bank that is in a cold location to maintain viability due to climate change. It is no longer always at those cold temperatures. So this is just one more reminder of how human activities are impacting our environment. So lastly, the question is, we have a massive biodiversity crisis. So how do we target where the benefits of our conservation efforts are likely to be the greatest? This is a controversial question of which species are most worthy of our efforts to conserve them. If we have 2 endangered species and we only have the budget to conserve one, who do we choose? So we have a program called the Edge of Existence Project, and it is going to help guide those funding decisions using 2 criteria to identify animal species that are most deserving of conservation. 2 questions. Number 1, does the species have few or no close relatives, so it is a member of a very small clade? For example, if we're looking at a group of frogs, are there other closely related frogs, or is it really stand alone? Because if it has more relatives that are closely related, it's going to be lower on the priority list, whereas if it's a really unique species, then it's going to be higher on the list. Next, is the species in danger of extinction? Because all of its remaining populations are threatened. So say we have an ostrich population that is threatened, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to raise those ostriches higher on the list if there are other ostrich populations that are not threatened. And so is all of them in danger of extinction. And so EDGE is a really handy acronym that stands for evolutionarily distinct, right? Few or no close relatives, and globally endangered. All of its populations are in danger of extinction. And so the species that make this list that have the ED and the GE, and so species that make this list that qualify as evolutionarily distinct and globally endangered can be targeted for more intense conservation efforts than other species who are not threatened or have close relatives. Quick nature of science to end with, issues such as which species should be Quick nature of science moment to end with. Issues such as which species should be prioritized for conservation efforts have complex ethical, environmental, political, social, cultural, and economical implications, and therefore need to be debated. Because even if a species falls under, even if a species is very evolutionarily because even if a species may not be extremely evolutionarily distinct or globally endangered, it might be really important culturally to a particular group of people, and so therefore still worthy of our priority conservation efforts. All right, good luck out there. All right, that's it for this one. Good luck out there.